Now, in the very first videos of the chapter here, we talked about how there was an old imperialism that existed, and really this chapter is focusing on the new imperialism. So let's think about why we shift from the old to the new. Remember, the old is this more economic influence over areas. It's not direct political control, whereas the new imperialism is, we said that there were older instances that resembled the new imperialism, like England controlling the American colonies, like Spain controlling areas of South America, Central America, and the southwest of the United States. But what we're going to see is when we get to the mid to late 19th century, this whole pattern is going to shift so that virtually all European countries are politically controlling these non-Western areas. So again, areas that were controlled prior to the 1800s maintained political independence. But then, yeah, once we get to later control, it's going to be much more oppressive, much more invasive. Um, China and Japan are good examples of countries that were controlled prior to the 1880s that at least retain some sort of political independence, even though China ultimately, you could argue, is controlled much more severely than Japan is. Um, so this new type of control again is referred to as the new imperialism. All right, what we're going to see is it's going to lead to a lot of tension and competition between European countries, as well as the possibility of war with non-European countries, of course, because these countries are going to be upset that there's this European influence. There are going to be some sort of nationalist uprisings that take place to try to get the Europeans out of there. Um, and also, imperialism is one of the major causes of World War I. So, this kind of fight for influence over all these different countries is going to be a major source of tension. And also Britain is sort of serving as the model for this new imperialism, and the first example of how they do that is their control of Egypt, which we already talked about. But when we talk about imperialism, it's the period that's known as the Scramble for Africa is probably much more well known. Basically, we're going to look at a map a bunch of times today, which is going to show us how Africa is effectively carved up by a series of different European countries, all wanting to have influence both economically and politically over these areas. All right, so it's pretty dramatic to see how quickly these European countries carve Africa up. So this first statistic here, in 1880, Europeans controlled 10% of Africa, but by 1914, they literally control every part of Africa except Liberia and Ethiopia. That's it. Okay, and again, we're going to look at a map in just a moment to show us that. Now, what starts this pattern? The very first instance that we see of the new imperialism takes place in Congo. Leopold II, who is the King of Belgium in 1879, is going to send an American-British journalist, a guy named H.M. Stanley, down to the Congo to try to set up some trading regions in that area. And what happens is that H.M. Stanley, when he's there, he signs these kind of sketchy treaties with African chiefs. Now, these African chiefs really don't know what they're signing, but effectively what these treaties do is it gives Leopold II control of the Congo. All right, and this is a relatively common pattern, kind of duping leaders in these areas to cede their land or their influence to European powers. All right, we're going to talk about the Berlin Conference in a little while in more detail, but it's 1884 to 1885, this conference that recognizes this region as what's called the Congo Free State, and it is Leopold's private possession. Okay, so Belgium at first is not actually controlling or occupying the Congo. However, under Leopold II's leadership, the population was treated very, very savagely. They basically what they were trying to do is get as much rubber and ivory into their possession as they possibly could. And Belgium is horrified when they see how these people in the Congo are treated, right? And this is just one image here that gives you a sense of the virtual slavery that took place in the Belgian Congo. All right, but the Belgian parliament is so upset at this savage treatment of the population that they actually take this personal colony away from Leopold, and in 1908 they make it a Belgian colony instead. All right, so basically what we're seeing here is that this first example, Belgian Congo, that's at first led by Leopold II, is going to raise the question of what the fate of the rest of sub-Saharan Africa is going to be. And many other European countries want to start to also have their influence in these areas, because ultimately it's yet another example of nationalism and competition from one European country to another. So one of the really significant events that starts to influence how uh, Africa is going to be carved up between different European countries is called the Berlin Conference. It takes place from 1884 to 1885. And it takes place in Berlin partly because notice the date, all right? Germany had unified in the previous decade. So now Germany is starting to emerge as a major power in Europe. And they want to have their influence over Africa as well. They want to kind of play a role in this imperialistic game. Okay, so what happens at first before the Berlin Conference is Germany's trying to colonize parts of Africa, but they're competing directly against Britain. And so what the conference is designed to do is to try to stop this tension between all these different European countries when they are extending their influence into different parts of Africa. So basically, Bismarck of Germany and Jules Ferry of France sponsor this conference. And what they are trying to do is set forth more deliberate rules and regulations as to how one can colonize a different part of Africa. Okay, and so what happens is their major rules, their provisions first are that no imperial power can claim a territory in Africa unless it proves that it effectively controls that territory anyway. So you can't just go in and occupy an area when you had no influence over it before. It also is ending slavery and the slave trade in Africa. All right, but we are going to see sort of pseudo-slavery continue during the age of imperialism. However, what this is trying to do is to avert too much tension when these different countries are trying to influence or trying to extend their sphere, their political control over Africa. But at the same time, because these direct rules and regulations are established, it's going to make the scramble for Africa much more tangible, right? You know, now they realize, oh, we need to influence these areas now so that we can later claim them. Okay, and we're going to go back to this map a bunch, but again, you see that by the outbreak of World War I, that virtually all of Africa belongs to one country of Europe or another. All right, again, the major exception, Liberia and Ethiopia. These areas are represented in a blue, which you can't really see it that well, but hopefully in your video you can see it better. These are independent African states, but every other part of Africa is controlled by some European country. All right, so who paves the way? England, of course. When in doubt, say England starts it. Think about how England started the Industrial Revolution. England was the first country to get a constitutional monarchy, and so on and so forth. All right, they see themselves as the most enlightened of the imperialistic powers, although you can still consider them to be oppressive in some ways. We'll talk about that actually later on in the slide with this battle here, the Battle of Omdurman. All right. So we talked previously about how England had already taken control of Egypt in 1883. It established a protectorate there that remained in effect well into the 20th century. All right. Their next area of focus is the Sudan, so just south of Egypt. We can see it represented here in this star. We'll talk about the Fashoda crisis in just a moment. All right. So Britain is pushing southward to the Sudan. Okay. Well, there is going to be resistance. You're going to see that that Sudanese people are going to try to stop England from coming in and occupying their territory. But this shows us how militarization is such a prominent force in the success or the failure of imperialism. In this instance, the British are very successful. They have the power of machine guns on their side. And so at this battle of Omdurman, they actually kill 11,000 Sudanese under the leadership of General Horatio H. Kitchener, and only 28 Britons died. All right, so this shows us that the Battle of Omdurman over the Sudan was a virtual slaughter of the Sudanese. All right, France also has its eye on the Sudan, and there's this event also in 1898 called the Fashoda Incident, and Fashoda is here, this little star here, so right in Sudan. Okay, basically it shows us that since France is also interested in Sudan, Egyptian, British, that is, soldiers, right? Because England was occupying Egypt at this point, so it has the benefit of using Egyptian soldiers. So Britain and France, Britain, with the help of its Egyptian soldiers, nearly go to war over the Sudan, but France ends up backing down because they're preoccupied with the Dreyfus affair. So England effectively gets control over the Sudan. All right, keep talking about England here. Another thing that we need to focus on is the South. All right, so here is Southern Africa before the Boer War. All right, now Cecil Rhodes, who you might know from Rhodesia, which is this area here, also now known as Zimbabwe. He's the prime minister of the Cape Colony in South Africa. All right, but his interest in this area increases significantly when diamonds and gold are found in the Transvaal region. Now, here's the problem for England. The Transvaal region at this point was controlled by the Boers. All right, the Boers were descendants of Dutch settlers. Remember that it was the Dutch that controlled Cape Town. For a long period, kind of during the Age of Exploration and so on. So basically, England has to figure out a way to get rid of the Boers in order to occupy the Transvaal region and have access to this gold and silver there. So and diamonds, that is. I said silver, I meant to say diamonds. All right, so what happens? Ultimately, the Dutch, or the Boers, that is, they're not Dutch anymore, really, because they've been there for so long. The Boers and the British go to war. At first, the Boers are successful at repelling the British troops, but that results in what's called the Kruger Telegram, also important when we talk about World War I, where the Kaiser of Germany, Kaiser Wilhelm, goes to the Boers and he says, "Hey guys, congrats, you defeated the British and you didn't even have to ask us for help. That's awesome." When the British get word of the Kruger Telegram, they get really, really angry, particularly at Germany, of course. So this is going to be another contributor to World War I. All right, but what we're going to see eventually is that the Boers are going to be defeated, and Britain is now going to have influence over all of this area. They're going to establish the Union of South Africa in 1910. So you see this area that used to be controlled by both British and Boers is now controlled only by British. All right, moving on to France. Okay, so two of France's most significant colonies are Algeria and Tunisia. Okay, Algeria they had controlled ever since 1830. All right, and the reason why they were able to justify their control was because French shipping was continuously attacked by Barbary pirates. They were actually Ottoman pirates, but they were operating from North Africa because remember the Ottomans controlled parts of North Africa at their height. All right, so basically the French used these attacks as a pretext to conquer Algeria, and they do. All right, so Algeria actually remains under the control of the French until the 1960s. All right, then Tunisia, how do they get hold of that? Well, in 1881, that is, France is going to annex Tunisia, and they're going to justify that because Tunisian rebels keep raiding Algeria, so they see this as sort of an act of war on an area that they already control. And this is going to allow France to establish Tunisia into a French protectorate. All right, Britain at first had claims to Tunisia, but during the Berlin Conference, they abandoned these claims. All right, other things about France. After the Berlin Conference meets, they decide to recognize that the French control the northern Congo Basin. All right, so they're expanding this territory here. Also, France is going to be given territory on the East African coast. Okay, so this territory was given to them by modern-day Somalia. All right. You're also going to see that they seize Madagascar, this large island off the east coast of Africa. They also have significant control over West Africa and the Sahara Desert. All right. And Britain is actually going to recognize that the French lay claim to this, partly because they want France to recognize that they have control over the Sudan. Remember the Fashoda crisis? They don't want that to come back and haunt them. So basically, they acknowledge that France controls certain areas of Africa, and England also controls their own respective areas of Africa. We'll continue and talk about Germany, as well as the justifications for and the arguments against imperialism in the next video.